the rescue of India from ages of barbarism, tyranny, and internecine war, and its slow but ceaseless forward march to civilization constitute, upon the whole, the finest achievement of our history. Winston Churchill. The early 20th century was an exciting time to be in England, and big wigs such as Winston Churchill himself supported colonialism in India. But as decades passed, soon both British and Indians felt the consequences of this imperialism in India. Imperialism had both positive and negative effects on Great Britain and India. Britain first started its era of imperialism in 1757, and for over a century held the territory of India in its palm. The 18th century takeover by India by England was rapid, and with more advanced weaponry, the British quickly took hold of the entirety of India. While they didn't exert much force in their rule, the British were able to negotiate with local princes for control of the Indian subcontinent. Britain profited from this control, and took resources such as spice and diamonds from India back home to the British Isles. People in India were not happy with this British control, and they protested, leading to India gaining independence from Britain in 1947. Britain hastily withdrew troops from the Indian region and decided to split the area in two, making a country named India that was mostly Hindu in religion. 1 million people became refugees after the split, trying to find their way into a country that accepts their religion. The Indians were left with an unsteady government with not much governing know-how, while the British were left with a damaged economy from the loss of the Indian territory. During Britain's conquest of India, the history of South Asia was changed drastically, for better or for worse.
Imperialism on India brought benefits as well as drawbacks, and it was clear that without the protection of Britain, India was unable to govern their own country. Britain came to India to take resources, and India lost valuable trades like spices and diamonds. India became a country reliant on farming and production of natural resources for Britain. However, India gained from Britain infrastructure and Western technology, such as roads, canals, railways, and telegraphs. They also got better education, and new Western ideas were brought to them, as well as modern way of thought, science, and life. One result of India's administration by Britain was a steady rise in the value of India's export trade. Also, laws quickly put in place by the British to get rid of infanticide and ending the slave trade. Famine also allegedly disappeared, and millions of acres were under cultivation. British-occupied India now had supposed peace and sanitation and a basic standard of living. While it seemed the occupation of India by Great Britain was greatly beneficial for India, there are also many drawbacks. Some have said the British control was like a knife of sugar. India gained a lot from the European colonizers, but the British were also taking a lot of materials from their own country. Industries were broken up, so economic development stopped, and local industries such as manufacturing were heavily regulated. While India became a supplier of England's industrial goods, a large unemployment scale formed, along with more poverty. Many authors have written about the consequences of Britain's imperialism of India. As said by the former Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, the standard of living fell drastically, while people such as Churchill would advocate for imperialism in India, and people like Nehru would argue against it. Most people would say that Britain took more benefit from this colonialism in India. However, if you look closely, one can tell that Britain also felt heavy drawbacks from colonizing India and became one step closer to the fall of the Great British Empire.
Britain brought home many benefits and drawbacks from India, with many in the financial sector. Britain colonized India looking for more colonies to supply food, spices, metals, and diamonds that could be manufactured and refined back in the homeland. This was important because Great Britain's and much of the world's economies were shifting into a more industrial mindset. Because of this, these countries needed to get food from somewhere else, and India was just the place for that. Britain got what they were looking for, as over the 89 years that they ruled India, they were benefited with large amounts of food, spices, metals, and diamonds that were refined and manufactured into goods back in the homeland. With these new goods being sold all over the world, their trade presence grew, helping their economy to blossom for many years. Their already large military presence around the world also bolstered with the control of the Indian Army. This would prove useful in the First and Second World Wars. But these world wars were decisive in the fate of Britain's presence in India. Britain was stretched too thin trying to govern the homeland, colonies in the Caribbean, colonies in Africa, and colonies in India, all while fighting expensive and deadly wars. Their economy was prosperous in this time period. Their government's finances were not. They were trying to invest money into colonies and infrastructure across the globe, all while spending money on advanced warfare technology to keep up with their European rivals and militaries. All of this left Britain's government's finances incredibly unstable. Britain left India with positives in economic development and a stamp on the world, but they also left financially and politically unstable, leading to many turbulent years in the future.
Imperialism had both positive and negative effects on Great Britain and India. Many great minds have butted heads over colonialization in India, and there is no consensus as to whether Great Britain's imperialism benefited or damaged the civilized world. However, everyone can agree that without this colonialism, we would be living in a much different reality. Britain's colonization of India has changed the nations of Great Britain and India for centuries, and if the British had never colonized, we might have seen a greatly changed world of Indian superpower and British failure.